the best measure of longevity is your meaningful relationships.
Yeah.
If you have meaningful relationships, you're already well ahead of the game. There's a book about it called The Good Life, and it talks about how important it is to have these quality relationships. And that is, people that get us, people that hear us, people that see us. And when we talk about burning out, that is the number one reason why, is that you have been giving to either a workplace or a person or, family members. You've been giving and giving and giving, and it has not been accepted, appreciated, or received. And so you yourself are depleted because you're not getting any sort of affirmation back that you matter. And that's where burnout has traditionally been a workplace issue. But you asked what I talk to clients about. And this is one of the big things, is that those concepts transcend the workplace and into our relationships too.
Welcome to Entrepreneurship Anywhere. I am your host, Nikki Corbett. On this podcast, we talk all about entrepreneurship. Stories from startups to businesses that are thriving, and even a few who have had stellar exits. We talk about it all. My goal for you as a listener is to learn, be inspired, find folks to relate to, and even motivate you, as opportunities for entrepreneurship are abundant. And if they can do it, so can you. Entrepreneurship Anywhere, because no great venture started without the audacity to begin. I'm so happy you're here. What is up, everybody? I am your host, Nikki Corbett, and I am excited for my guest today to have a really cool discussion about all of the letters that come after her last name, Dr. Camilla Moore. Thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm good, Nikki. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for wanting to be on the show and talk about your experience.
Absolutely. Why wouldn't I?
Well, hey, I don't know. To be honest with you, I don't know. I think that this is a great place to come and talk about your life as an entrepreneur. So let's dive into it. Why don't you tell me about some of these letters after your name, because there are a lot, and then tell me kind of how your journey got started to where you are now.
Yeah. How much time do we have? I'm a doctor of chiropractic. So there's the DC, and that's my training. I've been practicing for, I think it'll be almost 17 years this year, which is just
awesome.
Incredible. I know. And yet I haven't aged a day. But it was somehow. I don't know.
Weird how that happens.
Yeah, it's so strange. But I also have my board certification in lifestyle medicine, and I'm a registered yoga teacher. So I focus on stress management and burnout. I had a private practice for several years. That was a great practice, multi-six-figure business. And I started that. I had to start that like on a whim. I was coming out of a very toxic environment and kind of had to hit the ground running. Had no real time or space to, sit in my overthinking brain, which was, a tendency I had. And I decided that I'm just going to listen to my gut with all of these decisions. Like, I'm just going to let my intuition guide me and just trust that I'm going to get to the right place. And that's actually how I started that business.
Yeah.
And
so was that a chiropractic business, or was it a combination of everything?
I started out with just one room. I did a lot of sports medicine. I did a lot of soft tissue work. So I actually rented space in one of our very successful gyms here in town. Yeah. And so I made some great relationships with the trainers and the owners. And so it was a great business lesson in going to where your ideal client is and just being immersed in there. And so and we're in a small town and people know each other. And so it grew organically, and it grew very quickly. And then we expanded. By the third year, we had expanded twice. And I was in a much bigger space that had about 4 or 5 treatment rooms. We were renting space out for a nutritionist. So we had nutrition in the office. We had other chiropractors in the office. And so it grew very, very quickly. But it was all started with, a lesson in stress management and overthinking and anxiety and all of those things that I had been up until this point when I had the luxury to do it. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, like, it was do or die. Like, I had to start, and I had to see patients, and we had to just focus and and go forward.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about being a chiropractor because I am a huge fan of chiropractic care. I have been
Thanks.
under chiropractic care for on and off throughout, probably since I was in high school. One of my volleyball coaches in high school, her older sister was a chiropractor. And I remember having some issues with my back from, diving on the ground after volleyballs for, years and years and years. So I ended up seeing her. And then as just life evolved, whenever anything would come up, I would always go and see a chiropractor. Now, it's interesting because, it is certainly something that as a patient, you can go in with a little bit of trepidation, right? Because you're like, oh my gosh, this person is going to be cracking my bones, especially when it comes to the neck. That has always been, I've definitely have gone up and down where I have been very comfortable and also very uncomfortable with having my neck adjusted. Now, I'm curious, as a doctor of chiropractic care, how did you, like the first time you cracked somebody's neck, was that the most scary experience?
In school, we practice on each other as students.
Okay.
And so usually you're so terrified that you're not really doing much. Okay. And so they really ease you into it. And it is, the cervical adjustment, the neck adjustment, it is one of the most, I would say more controversial aspects of our profession. But, my approach was always, one, never to do anything that people aren't comfortable with, right? Yeah. I mean, that's just job number one is if someone is I don't want this, fine, no problem. We'll work around it. Yeah. But the other thing is that, where I did so much soft tissue work, by the time you're getting to mobilizing the joints, there's not a whole lot left. Okay. And so by taking that time, that extra time to kind of work through all the muscle tension, you need so much less force and it's so much less scary that, and it's more effective that it was just a really wonderful way of practicing. But it's still I am on the fence with a lot of it still. But it can also make a huge difference. In people's lives, especially with things like chronic headaches, or, it could be absolutely life-changing.
Oh yeah. I mean, when I got back from traveling, I got home Friday night and I had a chiropractic appointment Monday morning. And I went in and I told him, I was like, I feel like my left ankle has been kind of jammed up since day 10. I'm like, but don't worry. It didn't stop me from walking probably 10 miles per day. I'm like, but can you play around in there and see what's going on?
And did he?
Yeah, I got you. Oh yeah. No, I've seen him twice now. And overall for being gone as long as I was and sleeping in different beds and traveling and carrying stuff, I wasn't that out of sorts, but yeah, definitely have seen my fair share of chiropractors throughout my life. And I'm a big believer in the benefits.
I am so happy to hear that because, it really is one of the least invasive, procedures that you can have. And, we're pretty well trained and we have to have a lot of education to go through to get to college. And then, chiropractic school is pretty rigorous. And then we have national board exams and state board exam and then continuing education that we have to have every year. So we have to stay up on it. But I always just appreciate and love at its root what it is, which is let's just work on the foundations of movement first and see what we can clear up from there. And so when you come and you have an injury, getting to that root cause of, is this because of a weakness somewhere? Is your back in pain because your core is weak, or is your back in pain because you have restriction through the hip? Or do you have headaches because you have an old shoulder injury that wasn't properly rehabilitated? So getting into that root cause of where your pain is coming from is part of what I really loved about and still love and appreciate about that, because I think that's missing in a lot of medicine is really understanding at the foundation level, do you have the basics? And this is why I love lifestyle medicine. Is your nutrition on par? Are you exercising? Are you sleeping well? Are you moving well? Do you have close relationships that are important to you? So those fundamental things that we know make us healthy, at the root of it is the essence of what we do.
I mean, you're literally preaching to the choir with
Yeah.
all of that, because I hate that there's so much like treatment of symptoms instead of treatment of cause. And it's like, okay, let's not put like a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. Like, let's like actually find like what's the problem here and how can we solve it? And I think too that, you know, a lot of times like our bodies were made to work properly. And so it's like, if there are certain things we can do, like stretching, I think is so underrated. Walking is so underrated. Like getting enough sunlight is so underrated. Like all these different things where it's like, okay, if these things can actually benefit us, then things like non-invasive, you know, types of care, you know, non-pharmaceutical types of care, like can really help, you know, if you're trying to find the root cause of like why the pain is. And I think one of the things that chiropractic care has helped me learn is that sometimes your pain can manifest somewhere that it didn't originate, which is always wild when it's like, oh, like, wait, it's because of my left hip flexor that like my right knee is out of sorts. Like, how did that even work? But okay, you know.
Well, you know, it's interesting because there's parallels to the body work that I did as a practicing chiropractor and the work that I do now with stress and burnout. And one of the things that always just struck me with practice was the body will avoid pain at all cost to its own detriment. And so by the time you actually feel something, what that means is your body has adapted around the actual root problem probably for a very long time. And so we see this, you know, great example of that is a disc bulge or a disc herniation.
Yes.
And so if you have that, your body will actually pull, the muscles will spasm in order to take the pressure and take the disc away from the nerve so that it is trying to avoid that painful spot. And it will do that to its own detriment because now you're crooked and now that's going to load that whole side in an abnormal fashion. And so what happens a lot of times is that will still, like, you'll get out of pain, but your body doesn't necessarily go back to the baseline that it was before. It will just adapt to the point where you're out of pain and you can function. But interestingly enough, when we talk about stress, one of the things that we do in the program that I teach is get to the root fear behind stress. And we talk about with things like imposter syndrome and anxiety and stress and those things. And so what you're looking for is like, what is that root fear? And what you realize is that so much of the stress is coming from the resistance around what that root fear is, because we don't want to feel it. We don't want to be uncomfortable. And so emotionally and mentally, we do the same thing, is that we try to convince ourselves and work around whatever that root fear and that root pain is in our mind and try to find a logic explanation for what is actually a very primal feeling. And so you see these parallels in just how we operate, right? Yeah. And it's super interesting.
No, that's so interesting. And I want to go into what you were just talking about with fear and anxiety, but I have to just go back to where you started with how our bodies move pain around, because it was literally like you were telling my own story. Like, I'm not exaggerating. Like I woke up one morning. I will never forget this. It was 2012. It was my birthday. I got up and I went to the gym. And at the time I was doing CrossFit, and it was during the time of the year where they have like the CrossFit Open, like where everybody can do all of the exercises or the workouts to qualify for the CrossFit Games. Now, I certainly was never going to be anywhere near a contender for anything, but our gym was still doing all of the workouts. So it was a weekday. I had taken the day off of work because it was my birthday, and I was like, I'm going to get up, I'm going to work out. And then I was married at the time, and my husband and I were going to go and like, you know, go to lunch somewhere, have wine, do all the things. Go to the gym. The workout is 7 minutes straight of burpees. So of course I did that, and I'm a very competitive person. So I did push myself as hard as I possibly could. Get home, take a shower. I get out of the shower and I'm standing in front of our full length mirror, and I am literally crooked. And I'm looking and I wasn't in pain though. So I was like, is this mirror, like, is there something wrong with the mirror? And no, there wasn't. I like yelled into the other room where my husband was. I was like, Chris, I was like, come in here. I was like, there's something wrong with me. And it was absolutely wild. And then that sent me on a good 2-year journey of trying to get everything sorted out with my back. Turned out I had some degenerative discs. One of the I guess it was a surgeon that had taken a look at my MRI. He was like, basically you have like a little piece of disc that like is like floating around in there.
Ooh.
And he was like,
A sequestered disc.
would not, he was like, I would not suggest surgery for this. He's like, your body will eventually like absorb it and break it down. He was like, but you are gonna like, he's like, unfortunately, like your body is manifesting it this way and you are having a lot of pain. And he's like, there could be somebody who has an MRI that looks way worse than yours that's walking around just perfectly fine. And I was like, well, that's neat. So yeah, it was definitely a journey.
That's great
I'm thankful
for them
to be on the other side of that. But when you were saying that about the crookedness, like that was what was crazy because I would say I would go, oh, I went crooked. So I would have to wait or see some sort of massage therapist to like help loosen things up back there. So it would finally release. And oh my Lord, it was the worst.
Yeah. I mean, it could take, because we've also lost sight of just the concept of healing. And that takes time, you know, and it takes time and you have to give the body the ingredients that it needs in order to heal. And those are the fundamentals, again, you know, nutrition and sleep and all of those really good things. Yeah. But, you know, that's exactly how it starts oftentimes. And the CrossFit craze has calmed down, but I practiced through it. And I mean, it's, the problem with it was that there's a difference between functional failure and physical failure. And so by the time, like what you're saying, like that tends to attract a certain type of personality that likes to be pushed, that likes to be challenged, that wants to challenge themselves. But where many people get injured is where they're not necessarily able to distinguish when they're functionally failing, which means that like where their stability is failing and now they're just, you know, relying on their ligaments and their joints to do the work, and physical failure, because you can push through that very easily. But that's where many people, just like yourself, got injured. And that didn't happen that day. That had been building and building and building.
Sure. Yeah.
And that was just, you know, the straw that broke your back.
Literally. Yeah, it was brutal. It was a tough time. Yeah, it was a tough time. Like there was definitely a point where sitting hurt, standing hurt. So I remember it was Father's Day and we were at my parents' house and I was like lying on the ground and I had a glass of wine in my hand and I would like lean over and like have a sip. And I was like, this is not good.
Should have just gotten a straw.
Seriously. Oh my gosh.
Well, and you experience that chronic pain, and that chronic pain, like that is a whole other beast. Once you cross over into that chronic pain, like that's where, you know, you really can very easily slip into depression and all, you know, and it can really affect your mind as well as your body. And it's a very real thing.
Oh, very real. I mean, it was tough. Like, I mean, I got to a point one time where I was like, okay, I think I'm just going to be in pain every day.
Yeah.
And thankfully I'm not. I mean, there are some things that like, you know, if I stand for too long, for example, like sometimes I'm like, ooh, like my back hurts. Or if I sit in a certain type of chair, like, you know, a lot of restaurants, it'll be like the little kind of booth setting or like a couch situation and then a chair. And I'm always like, I'll take the chair, you know, because I need the support. But it's a part of my life that I am very happy is behind me.
No more CrossFit for you?
Oh God, no. I mean, and there's even like little things like, you know, I played volleyball all in high school. I think I mentioned that already. And like, I would love to play volleyball now, but like, I just know my body is so programmed to like diving after a ball. And like, that's probably not in my best interest with what's going on in my back. So I'm just, unfortunately, I don't, you know, but it's like, I'd rather be mobile than not.
And that is called wisdom.
Yes. Exactly. So, okay. So tell me more about how you went from this thriving chiropractic practice to making a decision to pivot and do something else.
So I sold that practice in 2018. My husband and I wanted a family. We had already been struggling with that. And we had been at the time caregiving for a dear friend that had Parkinson's. So we were experiencing what it was like to really be a primary caregiver and both be working full-time jobs. And so we really, after we got him squared away with home care and had his people be able to go in and take care of him in his home, my husband and I were like, we got to get out of here. So a friend of ours offered their house in Vermont, and we just went up there for a weekend, just drank wine and did the Vermont thing, and just really a heart to heart, and decided that I really wanted to sell the practice and let that go. And so I went to work for a big hospital system. I had already been doing, that's where I had been doing some of the research that I was doing with Brown. And so they already knew me. They wanted to start a chiropractic department in their lifestyle medicine department. And so we just kind of picked that up. Yeah. And it was a much easier transition because like I wasn't running the practice. I didn't have to do insurance. I didn't have to worry about managing staff. And then COVID hit. And at that point, like I was pregnant, we worked through COVID, pregnant through COVID, baby through COVID. And I had already started to get my board certification and had decided that I wanted to work on stress management within that as a specialty. And then about a year ago, there was some reshuffling, and I could have gone back into private practice or stayed there or really dove into this full time. And that's where I am now. So, and it's been a great transition.
That's wonderful. So what does your day-to-day look like now?
Well, so I have a 4-year-old, a 4.5-year-old. And so I work around that. So he's in school 3 days a week in a little pre-K. And, so those days are my work days, and I work all day those days. And then I usually take Saturday mornings to work, and my day to day is, I do a lot of one-on-ones with clients. I do a lot of marketing still. I'm on Instagram a lot, and just a lot of networking, meeting with people. And I also have been doing some corporate work. We have a big dental association here. And so I've been doing a lot of work with the State Dental Association and some neighboring ones, and just doing some workshops within some of the nonprofit spaces here and some of the other corporations that are local here. So a little bit of everything day to day.
Yeah, that's so fun. So what exactly though are you like, if a client's going to work with you one-on-one, why are they coming to work with you? What is it that you got? What types of conversations are you having?
Yeah. So, it's a lot of women, a lot of professional women, and, some men too, but mostly it's a lot of professional women that are kind of reaching the peak of their professional, careers, but they also have family. And so they feel like, how do I manage my family? And also I have this career that I've worked so hard for that I don't want to give up. Right. And so they feel these competing priorities, and they feel pulled, and there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of shame, but they don't want to feel that because they want both. And so, they hear these terms, we hear these terms like work-life balance. And that seems to be something that they should be able, and we should be able to achieve, but nobody knows how to do it, and nobody can tell you what it is. And really, and many corporations think that work-life balance just means offering more stuff at work, like, wellness programs or things like that to help balance the stress that they are creating for you. So a lot of it, the conversations, we start by shifting the lens. When we're looking at behavior change, the first thing that has to change is your mindset. And what I have found is that the way to do that is by looking at the same thing through a different lens with a different perspective. And so that's what we work with. We do a lot of assessments, self-assessments, to really understand, what is your unique stress trigger and what does it look like on you? And so identifying these triggers and then identifying what helps them and what doesn't help them, so that we can build a repertoire of day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year that can help manage some of this, but also just shifting the perspective and taking the shoulds out of the equation, taking the coulds out of the equation, and just saying, what is it that you really want to feel?
Yeah.
So it also, some of the things that I hear a lot are, I don't even know who I am anymore. Like I've lost this identity. Like I don't, because we're so busy caregiving and giving to, wearing the work hat or wearing the mom hat or the wife hat or the girlfriend hat or whatever, that there's not a whole lot of time to really reboot and say, okay, who am I and what do I need? And we've been sold this concept of self-care that I despise as a term because it implies that taking care of yourself is a separate and distinct act from every other part of your life. And you don't hear men talking about self-care. My husband doesn't say, I think I'm going to take some time and do some self-care today. It is a marketing, and the concept is important. The concept is important, but the way that has been spun and has been sold to us, I think is counterproductive.
Well, I totally agree with that too, because sometimes you see, because even in just the name, right? Like if somebody is saying like, oh, I'm going to take the day for some self-care. It's kind of like, okay, well, like what if there are people who can't take an entire day? They have too many responsibilities, or they're working multiple jobs and they have multiple kids or whatever it may be. So then does that imply that like, okay, I'm being selfish if I'm taking some time for quote unquote self-care? Or what, I mean, and I don't think being selfish is a bad thing. So like, let me first preface that. Like, I think that we were taught when we were kids, like, oh, don't be selfish, share your toys. But I view selfishness as a positive, because I look at it as if I'm not taking care of myself, who's going to do it? Literally nobody. So I have to be selfish in taking care of myself, because then I can be the best me in all of the different responsibilities and aspects of my life. But I think that it has become, self-care has become one of those like buzzwords, one of those like, oh, self-care Sunday, like I'm going to do all the things.
Well, it implies that exactly what you're saying, that, and this is, if that is what you need, like if going to the spa for a day, that fills you up, all the more power to you. But if it doesn't, and it's just a temporary fix, I think we have to look a little bit deeper and understand why. And that the term self-care implies that it's a luxury. It is luxurious. And so if you don't have the money, if you can't afford the time and money to do these things, then what does that mean? That you're not able to take care of yourself? That you are lesser because you're not able to pay this money and take this time, because time is actually the biggest commodity that we have, the most valuable commodity that we have. And so one of the things that helps is to really identify those things. And so when I say we look at through a different lens, instead of looking at things through priorities or tasks or responsibilities and itemize that list of priorities and tasks and responsibilities, we start looking at it through the lens of energy. And so instead of saying, because a priority list is step one to shame. I am convinced of that. Because if you fail and you have to choose, there's no winning that. There's no winning when you have to choose at who's number one and who's number two, right? So we get into this mindset of like, well, if family's number one and work is number two, then I'm number three. But then we feel like what you were saying, like, well, in order to be able to do all these other things, I have to then be, what's number considered selfish. And that's not necessarily the most accurate term to describe what is taking care of yourself. And so one of the things we do is, if you can look at your life in terms of energy and really get to the root of your intuition and your gut and saying, listen, this is what we do. We can just go through this. So make a column on a piece of paper, line down the middle, line across, pluses for charges on one end, negative for drains on the other. And then just take one aspect of your life. That can be work, that can be family, that can be, friends, whatever. But you're going to just list then what gives you energy and what takes your energy.
Okay.
And so it is an exercise in mindfulness because, right, another buzzword that nobody knows what to do, but everybody thinks they should be. So we'll talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
So what that is being able to look at your life with curiosity rather than judgment. And so you can look at every important aspect of your life and you can say, okay, does this aspect give me energy or does this aspect take energy from me? And it's not a measure of your commitment and it is not a measure of your love. And I'll give you an example. So I run every morning. Like we were talking about seeing the sun in the morning. You know, now it's dark when I run, but so I have my flashlight and my mace,
savings
right?
time with like every ounce of me. I'm like, it's 4:00. It feels like 8. Should I get ready for bed?
Yes, you should. You definitely should. Get in your comfy clothes. Yes.
What's happening?
Yes. But you know, that's my time. It's my first business meeting of the day, honestly, because it sets the tone. I get motivated. I wake up.
Yep.
And so that's a plus. But I have a 4-year-old who I love to death. I would, die for this kid. I would kill for this kid. And, he's the light of my life and he gives me so much joy and laughter. So he goes in the plus column, but he's also 4. And so sometimes we have 4-year-old days and those days go in the minus column, not because I don't love him any less, but because it takes a lot more energy to have to work through a lot of those parenting things because parenting is hard. And so recognizing that on those days where it's been maybe they're going through a developmental stage or had a tough day at school, whatever, where you recognize that has taken a little bit more energy. And then you say, okay, because of this, I am going to change this aspect of my life. And that may be something simple as I'm going to go to bed 15 minutes earlier, or I am going to, have a cup of tea that I wouldn't normally do to just help calm down a little bit more. But understanding what those little things are so that you can counter that when they happen in real time, so they don't build up over time and you don't get blindsided when you crash.
Okay. This is really, really, really good information. I like this and it makes me I want to do this exercise for myself because, you do. I mean, I like that you put it in the terms of energy because I really, I think energy is so important. Like I was trying to explain to my dad the other day, like how I feel like I've become really in tune with energy. Like when I meet somebody, I'm like, okay, like what's going on here? Like, are we vibing? Are we not? Is there some sort of wall up? Like, how am I working with this person? And then watching it shift too, as you start having a conversation with somebody and then maybe they feel like a little more disarmed because they like hear you talking about something or you immediately connect on something. And then they're like, oh, okay, we have this in common, like whatever that may be. So it's interesting to see, and I know for sure that like certain people can be big energy drains, right? And so recognizing those things in people, and are they people that you necessarily like have to keep in your life? Sometimes if it turns out that a friend has turned into a big energy drain, like that's a good thing, or not a good thing, but it's more of a thing where those are easier people to escape from rather than like if it's your boss, that's a big energy drain. Then you're kind of like, ooh, okay, how do I manage this? I had at my old house, I had a, service person that would come by and he was the biggest energy drain. And it was like no social cues. Like, and I would just be like, I can't sit here anymore and talk to you, it got to the point where I would literally be like, doors unlocked, I'm not here, because I didn't have the ability. I just couldn't do it. I was like, I can't, you just suck the life out of me, dude.
Well, and it brings up an excellent point where like, we have our group of people that we connect with. And, that guy probably has a group that, his energy jives with them just fine.
Yeah.
But the two together clash. And, it speaks to how important and also how powerful those relationships are that we have, where we are deeply connected. And that can be friends, that can be family, that can be partners, it could be anyone. But that is one of the things that we know is the number one reason that for longevity, the best measure for longevity, they've actually studied this. the best measure of longevity is your meaningful relationships.
Yeah.
If you have meaningful relationships, that is, you're already well ahead of the game, ahead of people that are running marathons and, you know, and doing, yes, Harvard studied this. They have an ongoing study with this. And where they have interviewed, they're on, I think, their second or third generation of people. And that is what they have found. There's a book about it called The Good Life. And I'm forgetting who the authors are, but these were the principal investigators of this study. And I'm also blanking on the name, but I do remember the name of the book. It's on my shelf. It's called The Good Life. And it talks about all of this, about how important it is to have these quality relationships. And that is, you know, people that get us, people that hear us, people that see us. And when we talk about burning out, that is the number one reason why, is that you have been giving to either a workplace or a person or, you know, family members. You've been giving and giving and giving, and it has not been accepted, appreciated, or received. And so you yourself are depleted because you're not getting any sort of affirmation back that you matter. And that's where burnout has traditionally been a workplace issue. But you asked what I talk to clients about. And this is one of the big things, is that those concepts transcend the workplace and into our relationships too.
Oh, so much. I mean, there's so much truth in what you're saying. And isn't it interesting how, you know, I love reflecting back on thoughts that I had as I have been, you know, growing up, right? I think that we're always going to be growing up, but like different thoughts. Like, so when I got married, I was 34. And I remember the girls that I had as my bridesmaids. I was like, these are my friends for the rest of my life. Like, I'm glad I got married in my 30s. I'm glad I didn't get married in my 20s, because I see how much friendships changed in their 20s. And like, but I'm 34 and this is it. And these are my best friends till the day I die. Literally half of those people I don't even talk to. And it's crazy.
Yes. And
right?
that's okay. You know, I think that is, and that's a natural progression, I think, you know, to weed that garden as you, because you consolidate that. You know, it's not that you have lost anything. You've just consolidated that energy that you had for 7 different friends into just 3 main ones that have become much more significant. And
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
My sister has that term of weeding the friend garden, that every now and then you just got to weed the friend garden.
Well, you know, and we all grow at different paces and at different, and in different directions. And sometimes it's not a matter of like, oh, I don't like you anymore. It's just like a matter of like, hey, our lives are so different that there's just not any commonality right now. And perhaps we'll like reconnect down the road. And it's, and then also like with time, I mean, you know, it's funny. I see some of my friends now who, when they had little kids, I remember them saying and making assumptions like, oh, well, when they're older and a bit more self-sufficient, like I'll have more time and it'll be easier. And now their kids are older and more self-sufficient. And they're like, I'm a taxi driver and now I have to do this and now I have to do that. And it's been like so interesting to watch that evolution. And then now having friends whose like kids are like off in college and now they're like, oh my God, like I'm going to be an empty nester in a couple of years. And all of these different like, you know, iterations of life, and how, you know, some friendships have we've been able to maintain them despite our lives being vastly different. And then some just, you know, whether it came down to like values or just life choices or whatever it may be, that, you know, things just are no longer what they once were.
Well, and that, you know, I think there is a lens to look through that too, because those, you know, we have been that friend in other people's life too, but honoring their role in your life and how they shaped that part of your life is, I think, where you can still honor and respect them as a person, and also the impact that your relationship had on each other, and that you have just you both have grown, you know, and you're now in a different place and you're growing in a different way, and they too are growing in a different way. And maybe those paths will merge again and maybe they won't, but it was great. And I think being able to look at all relationships in that light can take a lot of stress off for expectations of what you should or should not do in the present moment. And so just allow it to be what it was.
Yeah.
and say thank you and I love you and, step forward.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, I think the older we get and the more, experiences that we have and the more, if you are doing the internal work, like one of the topics that I like preach about and probably will be preaching about forever is self-awareness, and how I think self-awareness is just like the key to everything, because once you are self-aware and you kind of understand how you react in certain situations, how you're putting yourself out into the world, what kind of energy you're putting out and what kind of energy that's drawing in and all of those things, it's like, the more you kind of understand what it is that you need out of, the different relationships and the different friendships. And I know I got to a point a while ago where I was just like, I'm not forcing anything and I'm not chasing anything. And if a friendship starts to feel like it's totally out of balance, then that's okay. But like, I'm going to get to a point where I'm going to stop putting in effort if the effort isn't, if I'm not feeling like the effort is coming back my way. And what has been an interesting kind of like aha moment is that my circle got much, much smaller, but those friendships are so much more rich and they're so much more valuable. I mean, on Saturday night, two of my best friends live here. And it was funny because we had planned to get together on Friday night and we had it planned all week. And then something came up with one of them where it didn't end up happening. And we were all like, okay, no worries, no big deal. So then the next day, having it be completely impromptu at like 4:00, it was like, oh, let's all get together tonight. And so we ended up doing that. And we probably sat and talked for hours about so many great things. And we're also able to have conversations that were incredibly personal and vulnerable. And if there were other people that were involved in them, there might have been a lot of like judgment on some of the topics and some of the things that were being shared. But the friendship that the three of us have cultivated, it's a very much like judgment-free zone. It's very much like, hey, I'm just genuinely asking you this question because of what you just said. It made me wonder, like, well, why are you doing this then? And it was just so cool to be able to have that type of conversation that was, based in nothing but love and mutual respect, even though we're all at different places and doing different things.
It's really special. It's really special. And what, the concept that you're talking about with your friendships is you're creating space for it, and that's where like letting go of relationships that you're not really feeling like you are seen or heard, or that it's just not that as important as it used to be. What that does is that creates space for something else. And when I sold the practice, that was I believe that fully. Like we needed to create space for a family because we were both working, my husband's got a big job and we were both working 1,000,000 hours a week, and there was just no room for it. And if you want something, there is, we have two kind of competing concepts. We say making time, right? That's a term that we use. We have to make time. We have to make time. And that's up there with the self-care. It's like you have to make time for self-care.
Yeah.
But it really is about shifting that perspective to creating the space for it. Can you create space for it? You don't have to create 5 minutes, because you can't create time, but you can create space for things to happen. And we see this in the language that we use, right? Even the term manifestation, when people are talking about manifestations, really what you're doing is you're shifting your mindset to create the space for what you really want. And then you act on it. And that's the part, right? You can't just sit and think about it. You have to then act on it. But the idea is the more it is in the front of your head, the more that you're thinking about it, the more you see things as opportunities to fit into that. And that's where like we create the reality that we live in. And, we all are experiencing the same life right now, but we see it through our lens, and our lens has experiences, our lived experiences. And that's where it becomes uniquely ours to live. And at the end of the day, it is our life. And what is it that you want out of this life? That's the question. And are you living it?
Yeah. I mean, you have said so many things that are so inspirational, and I can see why people come to you for this type of coaching, because I feel like you're very passionate about it, but then you also really say things in a way that makes a lot of sense. And it makes, I'm sure your clients kind of hang up after calls with you and go, oh, wow, like I got to think about things differently. I got to put these things into practice if I really want to see some change.
I'm good at the pep talks. I am good at
yeah. I love it. I love it. So what do these next like few years look like as your son gets older and gets into school more full time and you continue to grow this business?
Yeah, one of the main reasons, and I know your listeners are a lot of entrepreneurs, so they'll appreciate this part. When I started this business, when I sold my practice, I was like, I don't want anything to do with a business. Like I was done with like all of it, and, but I've come full circle because it's just, I'll never not be able to do it. But I had two main criteria for this business. One, actually three. One, unlimited earning potential.
Got it.
So I wanted unlimited, and two, I wanted as much passive income as possible. Mm-hmm. And three, I wanted to be able, I married a sailor. He's a sailor. I wanted to, not for a profession, just like as an expensive hobby.
Yeah. I know it's funny. I'm glad you clarified that, because my ex-husband loves to go fishing. And for a while, I had a couple of college friends who literally thought he was like a fisherman for trade. And then when they met him and they're like, wait, he doesn't go out fishing every day. And I'm like, no, he goes like a few times a month, like when he can. And they're like, I literally thought that was his job. And I'm like, nope, it's not.
It's so funny you say that, because when I first met, my husband's name is Jake. When I first met him, I actually met some of his friends before I met him. And he lived in like this old beat up apartment. And I just knew them all as sailors. And I asked, his best friend, his name was Adam. And I said, what does Jake do for work? He's like, oh, he's an attorney. And I was like, I was like, no, really, what does he do? Yeah. He's like, no, he's an attorney. Oh and God. Because I thought the same thing. Like, I thought like he was just like this sailing bum that like, was, because he did it every weekend and every Wednesday night they had races. But no, he was just very lonely and needed a girlfriend. Yeah. And so I stepped up.
Nice.
Nice. But the third thing was, that's where I was going with this. I wanted to be able to run a business from anywhere, and we sail, we'll do bareboat charters and, for vacations. And so we want to show William, my son, the world kind of through that, like by sailing in different parts of, That's awesome. It's a great way to travel. So I wanted to be able, I didn't want to have to sacrifice. It's one of the things like with the practice where, if you're not there, you're not making money unless you have other people doing that for you. And then it's still not as much as you would normally make. So there's always going to be, there's no such thing as a paid vacation. And, so I wanted to figure that out. So those were my three main criteria for this business.
Okay. Well, I think those are great.
So far, so criteria.
Good. Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, that's wonderful. So do you ever see, or I guess instead of asking that, why don't I ask, do you have people that, friends and stuff that come over and are like, hey, can you adjust me?
Yes.
Do you?
But only like my good friends. And yes. And for them, I would do anything because they are my dear friends. But yes, I actually have a portable table and yes, bosses and coworkers and yes. So I still have my license in malpractice. So.
Okay, good. Yeah, because I could see, I know that I would not be above coming over with like a very nice bottle of wine and being like, hey, so my back's been a little wonky.
One of my best friends is a personal trainer, and she and I are the same age. She's, I think, 3 months older than me. So she's always kind of letting me know what's over the hill. So she's constantly hurting herself. And I'm happy to help her.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, this has been such a fun conversation. I have loved learning all about you and everything that you have done. How can people get in touch with you?
So the easiest way is probably through Instagram. I'm active on Instagram. I'm on there, every day. I respond to DMs and respond to to comments. And I have one of the things that people love is I love quizzes. I love learning about myself. And so there's actually a Burnout IQ quiz on one of my highlights. And so if you do that, you'll get a one-on-one with me that comes with it. So there's a lot of information there. I try to make some very educational posts that people can take away, like really good things. You can find me there. Dr. Camilla Moore is my handle. And then you can find me on LinkedIn, Dr. Camilla Moore. I'm on there either way.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your experience and all your nuggets of goodness. And everybody for listening and watching, thank you again for tuning in. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, share, all the good things. Let me know what you think, and we will see you next week.